Meta is where you learn to mimic the world's fastest learners. It is possible to become world-class in just about anything in 6 months or less. Armed with the right framework, you can seemingly perform miracles, whether with Spanish, swimming, or anything in between. Bill Gates walks into a bar, the power of outliers. A good teacher must know the rules, a good pupil, the exceptions. Martin H. Fisher, physician and author. Smart Design became one of the top industrial design firms in the world by being, you guessed it, smart. With locations in New York, San Francisco, and Barcelona, Smart Design represents clients ranging from Burton Snowboards to Starbucks. The company has also been strategic partners with OXO International since 1989. That ubiquitous line of good grips kitchenware with the comfy black handles. The ones that cover an entire wall at Bed Bath & Beyond. They made them. In the documentary Objectified, Dan Formosa, PhD, then with Smart Design's research department, explained one of the first steps in its innovation process. We have clients come to us and say, here's our average customer. For instance, female, she is 34 years old, she has 2.3 kids, and we listen politely and say, well, that's great, but we don't care about that person. What we really need to do, to design, is look at the extremes. The weakest, or the person with arthritis, or the athlete, or the strongest, the fastest person, because if we understand what the extremes are, the middle will take care of itself. In other words, the extremes inform the mean, but not vice versa. That average user can be deceptive or even meaningless, just as all averages one can be. Here's a statistician joke for your next hot date. Person A, what happens when Bill Gates walks into a bar of 55 people? Person B, I don't know. What? Person A, the average net worth jumps to more than $1 billion to boo-ha. Not exactly Chris Rock, but the joke makes an important point. Sometimes it pays to model outliers, not flatten them into averages. This isn't limited to business. Take, for instance, this seemingly average 132 pounds girl, who ended up anything but, see figure on page. Captioned. The girl next door kind of. Her picture was sent to me by Barry Ross, a sprint coach who creates world record dash-breaking athletes, to illustrate an ab exercise called the torture twist. He nonchalantly added on the phone, oh, and she deadlifts more than 400 pounds for repetitions. What? For those of you not familiar with the deadlift, take a look at the following sequence of Mark Bell lifting 485 pounds. Even more impressive, she developed this otherworldly power the wrong way. Rather than train the conventional full range of motion, she utilized only the weakest range of motion, lifting the bar to knee height and then lowering it. Total muscular tension actual weightlifting was limited to 5 minutes per week. This all makes our average-looking high schooler extreme. But was she an exception? In the outside world, absolutely. Even in track and field, she was a freak. Had she been thrown into a study with 40 randomly selected female sprinters, she would have been a ridiculous exception. Must have been a measurement error. Then the baby would get thrown out with the bathwater. But DISSS. That is, what would Warren Buffett say? I suspect the Oracle of Omaha would repeat what he said at Columbia University in 1984 when mocking proponents of the efficient market hypothesis. First, he pointed out that, yes, value investors, devotees of Benjamin Graham and David Dodd, who consistently beat the market, are outliers. Then he posed a question, which I've condensed. What if there were a nationwide competition in coin flipping? 225 million flippers total, then the population of the USA, each flipping once per morning, and we found a select few, say, 215 people who'd flipped 20 straight winning flips, where the result was guessed correctly on 20 mornings. He then continued holding his mind. Some business school professor will probably be rude enough to bring up the fact that if 225 million orangutans had engaged in a similar exercise, the results would be much the same. 215 egotistical orangutans with 20 straight winning flips. There are some important differences in the examples of value investors I am going to present. For one thing, if you had taken 225 million orangutans distributed roughly as the United States population is, if the 215 winners were left after 20 days, and if you found that 40 came from a particular zoo in Omaha, you would be pretty sure you were onto something. So you would probably go out and ask the zookeeper about what he's feeding them, whether they had special exercises, what books they read, and who knows what else. That is, if you found any really extraordinary concentrations of success, you might want to see if you could identify concentrations of unusual characteristics that might be causal factors. Our sprint coach, Barry Ross, has a most unusual zoo. In fact, he can engineer mutants at will. His best female distance runner has deadlifted 415 pounds at a body weight of 132 pounds. His youngest male lifter, 11 years old, has deadlifted 225 pounds at a body weight of 108 pounds. Our extreme high schooler is the standard in his gym. This naturally led me to ask, could I, an elite runner and an average, possibly replicate her results? I tried, and it worked flawlessly. In less than 12 weeks, Sam's coach and following a printout from Barry, I went from a max deadlift of 300 pounds to more than 650 pounds. Being the best versus becoming the best. As I write this, the two most viewed freestyle swimming videos in the world are of 1. Michael Phelps 2. Shinji Takeuchi. Phelps makes sense, but who the hell is Shinji Takeuchi? Phelps learned to swim at the tender age of 7. Shinji learned to swim at the well-ripened age of 37. More interesting to me, Shinji learned to swim by doing practically the opposite of Phelps. Shinji drives his lead arm forward, almost 2 feet beneath the water, rather than grabbing near the surface and pulling. Rather than focus on kicking, Shinji appears to eliminate it altogether. No paddleboard workouts to be found. Shinji often trains freestyle stroke with closed fists, or by pointing his index finger forward and keeping the arms entirely underwater. Phelps looks like he's attached to an outboard motor. It's a heroic output of horsepower. Shinji has been watched millions of times, because he offers the flip side, effortless propulsion. So, who would you rather have as a teacher, Phelps or Shinji? Arthur Jones, founder of Nautilus, when asked how to gain muscular mass quickly, recommended the following. I paraphrase: approach the biggest bodybuilder at your gym, ideally a 250, 300 pounds professional, and politely ask him for detailed advice. Then do precisely the opposite. If the TR exercise meathead recommends 10 sets, do 1 set. If he recommends post-workout protein, consume pre-workout protein, etc. Jones' tongue-in-cheek parable was used to highlight one of the dangers of hero worship. The top 1% often succeed despite how they train, not because of it. Superior genetics, or a luxurious full-time schedule, make up for a lot. This is not to say that Phelps isn't technical. Everything needs to be flawless to win 18 gold medals. It's the people a few runs down the best you realistically have access to, whom you need to be wary of. And then there is the second danger of hero worship. Career specialists can't externalize what they've internalized. Second nature is hard to teach. This is true across industries. As Eric Hasselman, executive chef at Tokari, my favorite Greek restaurant in San Francisco, said to me amid my office questioning, the problem with me is I've always been a cook. I don't remember ever wanting to be something else. Daniel Burka, a designer at Google and the co-founder of tech startup Milk, echoes the sentiment. I don't think I'd be particularly good at teaching the basics of CSS, a language used for the look and formatting of web pages for. Now I do 12 things at once and they all make sense. I can't remember which of those was confusing when I was just starting out. These top 0.01% who spend a lifetime honing their craft are invaluable in later stages, but they're not ideal if you want to rock it off the ground floor. The Shinji Takeuchis, on the other hand, the rare anomalies, who've gone from 0 to the global top 5% in record time, despite mediocre raw materials, are worth their weight in gold. I've spent the last 15 years finding the Shinjis of the world and trying to model them. Inhaling hormones, what could go wrong? My old friend Des Maupassant. My interest in accelerating learning started at a biochemical level. In 1996, as a planned neuroscience major at Princeton University, I began experimenting with a panoply of smart drugs and nootropics I'd imported to the United States under the FDA Personal Importation Policy 5. After 4 weeks, I'd fine-tune a routine for Mandarin Chinese character quizzes. 15 minutes prior to class, I would administer 2 hits of vaporized desmopressin in each nostril. Desmopressin is a synthetic version of vasopressin, a naturally occurring antidiuretic and peptide hormone. As a nasal spray, it is often prescribed for children who bed wet past a certain age. I was more interested in its off-label applications for short-term memory. Putting theory into practice, it looked like this. 1. 2 hits of desmopressin in each nostril. 2. Flip through characters in Chinese primer, character text almost as quickly as I could turn the pages. 3. Score 100% on the quiz. 5. 10 minutes later. 6. It was fantastically reliable. But after a few months of testing hydrogen, oxiracetam, and combinations of dozens of other drugs, headaches set in and a thought occurred, perhaps snorting antidiuretic hormones isn't the best long-term strategy. My dorm bathroom had also started to resemble a meth lab, which was repelling girls. So I shifted my obsession from molecules to process. Was it possible to develop a sequence, or a blueprint, that would allow one to learn anything faster? Any subject, any sport, anything at all. I suspected so. I glimpsed one piece of the puzzle 4 years earlier, in 1992. Material beats method. In 1992, I was 15 years old, and had landed in Japan for my first extended trip abroad. I would be an exchange student at Sikagekon High School for 1 year. On the first day of classes, I reported to the faculty lounge in my required navy blue uniform, looking like a West Point cadet. I nervously awaited my student chaperone, who would be taking me to my home class, the group of 40 or so students I'd be spending most of my time with. One of the faculty members noticed me sitting in the corner and approached. "Ah, Tim Yukun," he said with a wave. Kun is like San but used to address male inferiors. "What this is," he said, as he pointed at a mysterious piece of paper. I could barely manage greetings, so he hailed an English teacher to explain the document. The page, written entirely in characters I couldn't read, detailed my daily schedule, as it turned out. The English teacher translated physics, mathematics, world history, Koban, or traditional Japanese, and on it went. Panic set in. I'd only had a few months of rudimentary Japanese prior to arrival, and my teachers in the United States had reassured me with, "Don't worry, you'll have plenty of Japanese classes." Now irretrievably in Tokyo, I realized I was dealing with a major lost in translation screw-up. Japanese classes hadn't meant language classes. For the entire year ahead, I was to attend normal Japanese high school classes alongside 5,000 Japanese students prepping for university exams. This is when I put my pampers. I proceeded to flounder horribly, just as I'd failed with Spanish in junior high. Sadly, it seemed I was simply bad at languages. 6 months into my exchange, I was ready to go home. Then Lady Luck smiled upon me. I stumbled upon a poster while looking for the Book of Five Rings in the Kinokuniya bookstore in Shinjuku. This poster, which I still have on my wall 20 years later, contains all 1,945 of the Joyokinji, the characters designated for basic literacy by the Japanese Ministry of Education. Most newspapers and magazines limit themselves to the Joyokinji. For all practical purposes, this means that if you know the meaning-rich characters on the poster, you know Japanese, including all the most important verbs. Japanese on one page. Holy shit. Language is infinitely expansive, much like cooking, and therefore horribly overwhelming if unfiltered. This poster was a revelation. It brought to light the most important lesson of language learning: what you study is more important than how you study. Students are subordinate to materials, much like novice cooks are subordinate to recipes. If you select the wrong material, the wrong textbook, the wrong group of words, it doesn't matter how much or how well you study. It doesn't matter how good your teacher is. One must find the highest frequency material. Material beats method. The grammar of judo, transfer. If you have no interest in politics, will you enjoy a language course that uses political articles? Of course not. You'll get bored and quit. The authors of most Japanese language books appear to think that reading the Asahi Shimbun newspaper was the only litmus test for Japanese mastery. For a high school student, and even now, reading the Asahi Shimbun is about as interesting as watching paint dry. Fortunately, as long as you get the highest frequency material, I learned that content matters very little. My panacea, it turned out, was judo textbooks. Though the vocabulary ingredients was highly specialized, I eclipsed the grammatical ability of 4 and 5 year students of Japanese after 2 months of studying judo. Why? Because the grammar cooking methods was universal. The principles transferred to everything. Vital Judo, my grammar teacher. The Making of a Method, 1999, 2010. I came back to the United States after Tokyo, and scored higher on the Japanese Saturday too than a friend who was a native speaker. By high school graduation in 1995, I developed 2 simple lenses through which I viewed language learning methods, and learning in general. Is the method effective? Have you narrowed down your material to the highest frequency? Is the method sustainable? Have you chosen a schedule and subject matter that you can stick with or at least put up with until reaching fluency? Will you actually swallow the pill you've prescribed yourself? Alas, there was still one missing piece: efficiency. If effectiveness is doing the right things, efficiency is doing things right. Martin Luther King, Jr., famously remarked that justice too long delayed is justice denied. Learning is similar. Speed determines the value. Even with the best material, if your time to fluency is 20 years, the return on investment is terrible. Though 1996 heralded itself with vasopressin and its cousins, taking me to the biochemical level for immediate payoff, it wasn't until 1999 that I returned to the hardest part, the most slippery element of the puzzle, the method. The catalyst came serendipitously one evening on Witherspoon Street in downtown Princeton. I was heads down working on my senior thesis, a sexy tome entitled Acquisition of Japanese Kanji, Conventional Practice in Mnemonic Supplementation, and I developed a phone friendship with Dr. Bernie Faria, then Director of Curriculum and Development at the World Headquarters of Berlitz International, conveniently located only miles from campus. He invited me out to a jacket and tie dinner, and I put on my fanciest corduroys and a fitting sports coat and a counterfeit polo shirt. It was a glorious feast, and Bernie was a gracious host. He knew his languages, and the red wine flowed. We shared war stories from the linguistic trenches, lessons learned, comedic mistakes, and cultural fox pas. Bernie shared his French adventures, and I told him about the time I asked my Japanese host mother to rape me at 8 a.m. the next morning. Ah, just one vowel off. But Okaju to rape was not Okaju to wake. You've never seen such a confused Japanese woman. He roared. By the time dessert came around, Bernie paused and said, "You know, it's a shame you're not graduating earlier, as we have a project starting soon that you'd be perfect for." The project was helping redesign their introductory Japanese curriculum, which doubled as an opportunity to revisit their English curriculum, which then accounted for 70% of their roughly 5 million lessons a year at 320 language centers around the globe. Imagine wandering into your local guitar shop and approaching the high school intern behind the counter. "Hey, kid, how would you like to tune the London Philharmonic Orchestra? They have a live gig in Central Park next week and it'll be broadcast into 50 countries. You in?" I felt like the kid. I left Princeton in the middle of my senior year, just months before graduation, to pursue this love of language. I worked for Berlitz, then itching to test new ideas immediately traveled to Taiwan, where many of the pieces started to fall into place for DSSS coming in a couple of pages. Then I did something odd. I applied the same DSSS process to learning kickboxing and, less than 2 months later, won the Chinese National Kickboxing Championships at 165 pounds. Flash forward to 2005. I had spent 6 years testing different approaches to natural languages. Here's what my language acquisition times looked like in order, using standardized testing for all but Chinese. Recall that, at age 15, I'd failed to learn enough Spanish to hold a basic conversation. Now people were lauding me for being good at languages or congratulating me on being gifted. It was hysterical. I just had a better instruction manual. In 2005, I traveled the world as a digital nomad, an experience later chronicled in the 4-Hour Workweek. I focused on language to conquer loneliness: Irish, Gaelic, Norwegian, German, Spanish including Lunfardo dialect in Argentina, anything I came into contact with. The refinement continued through 2010 and to the present. I've read the process on Turkish, Greek, Ghoza, and other languages over shorter 1-2 week periods. The DSSS process I used was effective for acquiring declarative facts and figures knowledge, e.g., memorizing serial numbers, remembering where your car is parked. It also worked incredibly well for procedural action knowledge, e.g., practicing judo, riding a bike, driving a car. It even worked for hybrids, e.g., writing Chinese characters. None of this is said to impress you. It's said to impress upon you that there is a repeatable process, and that hundreds of readers have replicated my results. It is possible to become world-class, and the top 5% of performers in the world, in almost any subject within 6-12 months, or even 6-12 weeks. There is a recipe, the real recipe in this book, and that is DSSS. Read on to learn the formula. DSSS. The recipe for learning any skill is encapsulated in this acronym. How to remember it? The 1980s cultural contribution to modern English, DISSS. Just remember this with an extra S, DSSS. If you're a gamer and no PS3 PlayStation 3, just think of DS3. Here's the sequence, see figure on page 167.